Hello, everyone, and welcome to the John Lewis Commemoration Day virtual teach-in. I'm Catherine Fleming Bruce with Camelot Excalibur Trust. We are based in Columbia, South Carolina, and we're so pleased to be a part of this national initiative, which is launched by a number of partner organizations that have made democracy and voting rights a central focus of their efforts. I want to express my thanks to supporters who made this program possible, one of whom was Reparations United, architects of the project Earn the Black Vote. So they and so many others made it possible for us to be here with you today. One of our goals is to reach out and invite participation from every state in the union. Some of you have been dropping your state in the chat. We thank you for that. We want to know how close we got to our goal. So please go ahead and as you come in, go ahead and drop your state in the chat. We had registered some 200 some odd people from about 30 states. So we're going to see if we got closer to the 51 state mark. This event is one of the 85 hosted in the US. We decided to make our event virtual and to focus very specifically on 3 outcomes. First, we want a clear picture of the political moment that we are now in and why it is critical that this fight for voting rights is launched at this moment. Secondly, we want to make sure each of you leave our event with a clear understanding of the specific bills that we're advocating for, what those bills do, and what protections and rights those bills provide, as well as their status on Capitol Hill. So how close are they to the finish line, and how do we go about getting them across the finish line? And third, we want to focus on what specific actions you, in partnership with others in your community, can do starting tomorrow to help ensure that these bills pass into law in 2026. So at the end, we'll have an opportunity for questions. So feel free as we're talking to put questions in the chat so that we can get to them. So I would love to do this, and I know I can't do it alone. So many great things that we try to do, we find that we do in partnership or with other people helping us. So today we have 2 high-power advocates who are here with me today to move us through this agenda, and I'm pleased to introduce them. Joining us from Washington, D.C. is Jonah Minkoff-Zern. He's the campaign co-director with Public Citizens Democracy Campaign. So bet you didn't know there was a democracy campaign. You know about all the other campaigns, but there's one that's focused on democracy. So Jonah, thank you for being here. And my fellow and friend in the trenches here in South Carolina, in the upstate of South Carolina, is Charles Mann. He's worked with a number of organizations, South SC Counts, working with upstate grassroots organizations, worked with the Solve organization and the Southern Coalition for Social Justice. So very deep roots and engagement. And Charles, we're glad that you are here. Thank you so much. So now I'd like to go ahead with our agenda. And we want to focus first on the political moment that we are in. What is the fight about? Why do we have to do this now? We did these voting rights actions last year. So why are we coming back to this? What is the situation and what is at stake? So we'll start with Charles.
So when Catherine asked me and Jonah, we were talking the other day, and they said, what's at stake? And they wanted me to talk about this from an advocate standpoint. There's one word that came to my mind: everything. Okay. And what I mean by everything, I'm 72 years old. I've been at this for a while, and everything that I am familiar with since the 1960s is at stake. And by the way, folks, I apologize. I'll be referring to some notes as I go through this because at 72, I can't remember like I used to at 25. So, and at the top of this list of everything that's at stake are voting rights for you and for me. And all this really started hitting the fan, in my estimation, back in 2013 with Shelby v. Holder. And at that time, the Supreme Court ruled that pre-clearance no longer was required in redistricting, and when states changed their political lines. So since that time, over 30 states have passed over 100 restrictive voting laws in our country. And since 2023, 14 states have passed 17 laws of restricting voting. So for me, at the top of that list of what's at stake is voting, because everything else falls downstream from voting. Who we elect has an impact on who creates policy. And so that has a real big impact. And in that decision, as I noted, Justice Roberts said that the conditions for his reason to throw out pre-clearance is that the conditions that created that in the 60s and the 50s no longer existed in America. Mm-hmm. So we didn't need pre-clearance. Now, I know, and you know, he was wrong, okay? Because almost immediately after the passage of the Supreme Court ruling, states started filing bills to restrict voting access. And it has continued to today. And so sometimes people ask me, am I concerned about restricted voting laws? I say, yeah, but I'm more concerned about low voter turnout. And as I stated earlier, I'm concerned about that because low voter turnout enables bad policy, enables restrictive voting laws. So just in the state of South Carolina, we just had primaries a month ago. And in the state of South Carolina, of all registered voters, not eligible voters, but registered voters, only 17% showed up in the primaries. Now, in a state like South Carolina, and it resembles other states of people here on the call, Texas, Georgia, Florida, Arizona, and those places, those people who generally win in the primaries go on to win in the general election. So in my state, I say to people, and it's similar in your state, if only 16% of the people are showing up to vote, then that means that, 80+% of the other people in the state are now governed by those people 16% of the people who selected representatives to the state legislature. So 16% are determining how the remaining population will be governing. Low voter turnout. We get bad policy. We get restrictive voting laws. And in my state, we're also a 71% supermajority in the state legislature with Republicans. And it's been driven by the Freedom Caucus, those far, far right people who are making laws. And then when we look at the midterms in my state, and it's similar to your other states, in the midterms, we only have 48% of the people turn out to vote. 48%. And as I say in my efforts up here, I say it is hard to have a positive impact on public policy when less than 50% of the people participate. And I also noted to some of my people that Black women are voting higher than Black men. And I had a conversation around that today. And then when we go to the presidential elections, we generally end up with about 75% of registered voters voting. And people say, oh, that's a great deal. I say, no, that means that 25% of the population that are registered to vote are not even participating in the national elections, not voting. And then that brings us to the Supreme Court and Project 2025. All of this is what's at stake. Mm-hmm. And as I mentioned, I'm 72 years old. And when I was growing up, watching the civil rights movement and being engaged as a teenager and a college student, we looked at the High Court as our friend. We looked at them to backstop us in bad public policy. Well, that's no longer the case, people. The court, in my estimation, is no longer our friend. The 6-3 conservative majority is determined to turn the clock back. And I guess what they're trying to do is make America great again. Not the America that I look forward to being a part of. But this has long been a goal of the conservative right, and they have achieved their goals. And this goes back to the days of Roberts, who's now the Chief Justice, Alito, who's an associate, who is a justice on the court. They were in the Reagan administration as colleagues at the Justice Department. And one of their main goals during that time that they were in the Reagan administration, it was to cut back on personal freedoms. Now they've reached the court. They have 4 other people there with them who agree with their ideology and their process, and they are chipping away at our freedoms and our liberties and our rights. And so that's sort of what's at stake. And they're also saying that settled law is no longer settled law. Mm-hmm. Even when they said that in their congressional hearings, no longer settled law. Roe v. Wade, as an example. And this court is on a path to undo equality, equity, and inclusion. And in my estimation, just basic fairness. And if I might go back to one of their court decisions of recent months, it was the South Carolina redistricting case. And Alito wrote in that case, he said that we, South Carolinians, should give the South Carolina legislature the benefit of the doubt and assume that what they're doing is for the greater good of South Carolina. Now, I've been a South Carolinian all my life. Even when I moved away, I was still a South Carolinian. And anyone who grew up here knows that when it comes to politics and voting rights, you should never give the state legislature the benefit of the doubt. And this is the same institutional body, by the way, that convened the Constitutional Convention in 1895 in South Carolina. And the whole purpose of that was to take away the voting rights and the political rights of Black citizens in the state of South Carolina. They succeeded. And as a result, Black folks in South Carolina during the Jim Crow era took a step back. Now they want to hold another constitutional convention in the state of South Carolina. And there are other southern states who are having the same talk. So what do you think they plan to do? What do you think they plan to do? And to my estimation, no, I will not give them the benefit of the doubt. So getting back to SCOTUS and its greater decisions, one of the more recent decisions was the immunity decision. Basically, and it basically is frightening what that means for us in our democracy. And it leans us closer towards authoritarianism. So what they're basically saying, in my estimation, and from people I've talked to, that the president is above the law. That anything that he does as an official act, it's okay. I think that that is outrageous. I think as a citizen, we should rise up and say to the Supreme Court, no, no one in this country, including the president, who is doing what he calls official acts, is okay. And so we have a president, and they've given the president the right to commit crimes and to say, it's okay, I'm immune. But if you and I do those same crimes, we're held accountable. So that's at stake here. And what do you think Donald Trump, and I don't want to get too political here because I don't want to cause Catherine and Jonah any heart anxiety, any heartburn, but what do you think he's going to do with that immunity? What do you think he's going to do? He's already shown us what he would do. He talks about what he would do. And then when you roll in Project 2025, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think that he will say, oh, I'll do the right thing? As he said when he said, oh, I don't know anything about Project 2025. I don't know the people involved. And by the way, I have a bridge I want to sell you. It's very cheap, okay? And so that's what I think about that. So 2025 is that conservative roadmap for the next president who goes in office in terms of how government will look and how they think it will look. And it's about 900 pages. And I haven't read all the pages, but I've read several summaries. But here's some highlights I want to bring to you on that. It plans to roll back diversity, equity, and inclusion across all government agencies. They want to replace civil servants with party loyalists. And that's just a train wreck waiting to happen. They want to create a presidential administration academy. And what they want to do with that is all the people that they want in their administration, they want to take them into a course program and indoctrinate them about what they want to do. And it's my guess that they want to give them as a handbook and a guidebook, Project 2025. Another aspect of this is that they want to dismantle the Department of Education. Now, those of us who have kids and grandkids who want to go to school, go to college, what do you think that means for Pell Grants? I think it means they're going to go away in terms of how we now do them. So fewer people will be eligible to go to college. And as an illustration of that, in North Carolina, in the city of Charlotte, there's a college there called Queens College. I think it's called Queens University now. Because of the FISA problem that they just had in enrolling students through that progress, that college got 150 fewer students than they were anticipating. Because of that, that college is now going to have to lay off professors and staff because the money isn't coming in from the Department of Education. Another aspect of this 2025 is they're going to roll back climate change efforts. Just roll them back. And one of the things that I saw in there that jumped out at me is that they want to eliminate NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. That means the Weather Service. So those of us who look at the weather and say, is it going to rain today? Will that be there after Project 2025 and if it gets implemented? They plan to cut back regulations concerning overtime for hourly workers. And by the way, that impacts about 4 million people. They want to reduce and change food stamp assistance programs, which impact about 40 million people. And they potentially will impact about 250,000 workers because of the acts and the actions of 2025 will lose their jobs. They plan to roll back civil rights protections, LGBTQ protections. They want to eliminate Head Start, which is about 1 million kids. They want to push 33 million people like me off of Medicare into medical advantage programs, which are run by insurance companies. And we know what that's about. So those are just some highlights. So do you want to give a president who thinks that he's above the law and the law does not apply to him? Do you want to give him immunity with a guidebook of 2025? I would say no. So what's at stake? Everything, as life as I know it, will potentially change in this country. And I just want to give you one last illustration. Today I had lunch with the new director for the Center of African American Studies at the University of South Carolina Upstate, which is the upstate version of the University of South Carolina. And during our conversation, 2025 came up. And he leaned across the booth and looked at a young Black man in the next booth. And he asked the young man, do you know about Project 2025? And the young man looked back at him and said, no, what is it? And he looked at me and he said, that's what I'm talking about. So we have to educate our people about what this is all about. So there's a lot at stake. So I believe that our last wall of defense is November 5th, Election Day. We must turn out, we must vote, and we must vote in large, overwhelming numbers. We must tell this effort to roll our country back in this election. We must tell them a resounding no. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank
That's
you.
what's at
Thank you
stake.
so much, Charles, for setting up the pins and reminding us of why we're all gathered here. Really appreciate it. So now, with that in mind, we're going to move to the conversation about these bills. So there are four that are part of the formal conversation that's going on right now: the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, the Freedom to Vote Act, the Native American Voting Rights Act, and Washington D.C. Admissions Act. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the statehood for Puerto Rico as well. But we're going to ask Jonah to come in and walk us through these bills, what they're about, where they stand, and why they're so important.
Thanks so much, Catherine. Really grateful to be part of this event today, and to be working alongside, and I'm Jonah, he, him, with Public Citizen. Really grateful to be working alongside partners like the Transformative Justice Coalition, the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, the League of Women Voters, the Declaration for American Democracy, and dozens of other organizations that have been part of planning these nationwide events today. More than 85 events around the country. I had a chance to go to ours here in Syracuse today, a really just beautiful, powerful event, an incredible turnout for a small city on a hot summer day. I'm really grateful for all the people who came out here and are coming out around the country. So I am going to just do a presentation briefly on three of the four bills that we're advocating for today. I'm going to talk about the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement, or the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, the Freedom to Vote Act, and DC Advancement Act, or DC statehood. And Catherine's going to talk a little bit more about the Native American Voting Rights Act. So I'm going to just share my screen and a few slides here just to go through these bills. Sorry. So
there you go.
Yep. So John Lewis, obviously, is our hero for his work on voting rights, and I think the notion that voting rights is our vote is the most powerful nonviolent tool we have to create a more perfect union, is his quote. And I think that tool is what they're scared of. That power that we have is what they're scared of, and what the MAGA movement is scared of, and trying to destabilize and undermine our democracy. And as Charles talked about, the Project 2025, and just how concerning that is in weaponizing the federal government against our ability to vote. And I think, like, for me, one of the pieces of it that it really transitions the Department of Justice from an institution that's upholding our civil rights to vote to an institution that's doing like what DeSantis has done in Florida, and going out and gathering people up in the middle of the night, arresting them for voting, and finding ways to criminalize voting. And it really is a concerning plan and a concerning vision. And I had a chance to debate Hans Van Spokowski last week in Alabama, and just hearing kind of his way of creating an illusion of fraud, and an illusion that our election system isn't working, is really disturbing. And his motives behind that are because he and his institution, the Heritage Foundation, know that they can't implement their unpopular agenda of taking away our freedoms, of taking away ability to make decisions over reproductive rights, our ability to access healthcare, our ability to access quality education, fundamental things about what we need to survive, to address climate change. They know all of those things that they're trying to attack are not a popular agenda. So the way that they can win that agenda is by attacking our freedom to vote and by suppressing our vote. So really, the most important thing we can do over the next 5 months is to get people out to vote and make sure we overcome the barriers that they're putting in our way, and work together to do that. So first, I want to address the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. The act is in major part, in response to the Shelby Supreme Court ruling that stripped away as Charles put it, that stripped away preclearance, that allowed states to start passing laws upon laws to suppress the vote of voters of color. And as Ruth Bader Ginsburg put it, to take away the umbrella that was protecting us in the rainstorm of voter suppression. And so these are states that were covered by Section 5 at the time of the Shelby County ruling. And since then, those are the states that have taken the lead. Many of them, fortunately, not my state of New York or Michigan, which both have passed really great Voting Rights Act. Actually, Michigan needs some pressure to pass its John Lewis Voting Rights Act. We passed ours here in New York. Many of these other states have been taking the lead in passing these suppressive voting laws. So what does the act do? It would modernize and revitalize the Voting Rights Act, strengthening legal protections against discriminatory practices. And I'm just going to go through these kind of quickly rather than going into a lot of detail, but here are some examples of preclearance and what preclearance would protect should the Voting Rights Act pass. Things like creating at-large districts in places with sufficiently large minority populations, changing jurisdictions, boundaries to remove minorities from jurisdiction in places with sufficiently large minority populations, changing boundaries of districts where a minority group is sufficiently large and it has a large population base, imposing stricter requirements for documentation or proof of identity to vote. And the list goes on. So, but basically, the idea of states passing laws that are intentionally aimed at suppressing the vote of voters of color, and these are examples of things that it would specifically protect against. Also, vote dilution. Relatedly, so a voter can bring a federal action for vote dilution, such as gerrymandered districts that make it harder for candidates preferred by minority voters to win. Vote denial. So bringing federal action for vote denial with restrictions, when restrictions result in minority voters having more difficulty casting a ballot than non-minority voters. And retrogression. So it's a cause of action for voters to sue states or localities that implement a voting rule that's more discriminatory against minorities than the rule it replaces. So basically, it provides these foundational protections that were removed with the Shelby Supreme Court ruling, and strengthens the act beyond that, to ensure that states are not passing these really egregiously restrictive bills to prevent people from voting. So then the second piece of legislation that we are advocating for today is the Freedom to Vote Act. And I'm stealing some slides from Declaration for American Democracy that were part of that coalition of more than, I believe it's more than 300 organizations now working to pass the Freedom to Vote Act, and working in close coordination with the Leadership Conference and passing the John Lewis Voting Rights Act also. But so what it does, it protects the right to vote. It ends partisan gerrymandering, tackles dark money in politics or secret money in politics. And along with the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, it's the most important voting rights bill since the Civil Rights era. And it's notable that if there is a pro-democracy trifecta, this is one of the first things, and Schumer and Jeffries have committed that this is one of the first things that they want to advance. So we have an opportunity to win this depending on the outcome of the election. And we're not partisan in the election at this point. We may actually change our mind for the first time in our history, but at this point, we're non-partisan in this election. But we recognize that there are real significance in the outcome here. So the Freedom to Vote Act, it tackles corruption by ensuring that government works for us. It takes on loopholes that allow billionaires to buy our election. It prevents foreign influence in U.S. campaigns. It strengthens campaign finance enforcement, and it creates a small donor financing option for House elections. So it means that if we give a certain amount to a House race, that amount is matched. So all of a sudden, we have much more power over our election than billionaires who are spending millions of dollars. We can start to match them, and our small donor contributions start to really have power in elections with the Freedom to Vote Act.
Jonah, I do have a question. Do you want to wait until the Q&A time, or do you want to answer John Lewis voting right question now?
I can answer it. That's fine, Catherine. Sure.
Okay, the question is there anything in the John Lewis Voting Rights Act specifically addressing people with intellectual and developmental disabilities as a protected class?
You know, that's a good question. My understanding is it's focused on discrimination based on race, but I actually don't know the answer to that. And I'm embarrassed to say, my understanding is it's focused on racial discrimination, and
Well, that's actually a good point, and something that can possibly be added if it's not there, because all of these are bills that are going to enter the queue either sometime next couple of months or in January. So I think if that concern is there, that could be sent to the sponsor of the bill.
right. Well, and that's a good point. And I think, I mean, my sense is that many of those things are interrelated, but I also think you're right that it is an important point. And I just will take a minute to look that up after. I'm embarrassed to say that I don't know the immediate answer to that.
Oh, don't worry. We'll get back to you all on this, though. I've got
Um,
everybody's email.
Sure. So just to go on around the Freedom to Vote Act, so it also creates things to break down barriers to voting, things like automatic voter registration, where we interact with the DMV or another government institution and we're automatically registered, or our roles are automatically updated, same-day voter registration, online voter registration, and a guaranteed 2 weeks for early voting. So really things that should be common sense to all states, and states, many states are resisting because they know that if they provide these for voters, if they break down barriers for voters, that the people who they don't want to vote, like all of us, will have more access to the polls.
Right. And we had our weekends taken away here in South Carolina with the new legislation in our state.
And that's extraordinary. And there's no excuse for that. It's just blatant attempt to undermine people's ability to vote.
Mm.
So it expands no excuse voting by mail for all eligible voters, really popular and important way for people to vote. Gets rid of long lines at the polls and ends unjust bans on food and water being distributed. Another thing that's just extraordinary to me that even exists. It occurs discriminatory voter purges, like purges from the rolls. It restores voting rights to formerly incarcerated people. That's a really important issue for us, a public citizen. And, we believe that no one should ever have their ability to vote stripped away, like Vermont and Maine and Puerto Rico and D.C., and that don't strip people's vote away when they're incarcerated ever. It also prevents election subversion of the process. So protects election officials and poll workers. It combats mishandling of ballots and other sensitive materials. So that's the Freedom to Vote Act. And then the next piece is just very simple. It's providing statehood for DC. There's no reason that 600,000 people who live in DC, larger than the state of Wyoming, should be denied the ability to vote, who are a majority minority state, and there's no reason that people living in DC should have their votes stripped away from them. And there's an event going on right now with Mayor Bowser and others in DC as part of the National Day of Action, and that's a clear part of that event. So I'll pass it back to Catherine, who's going to address the Native American Voting Rights Act and Puerto Rico statehood.
Okay, thank you so much, Jonah, for that. Does anybody have any other questions about those three before we move to the other two? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and I'll share my screen. That's always a fun task. I'm finally learning how to do that correctly. Okay, so here, we wanted to talk briefly about these other two bills. So this one is the Native American Voting Rights Act. And the impetus for that is mainly because Native Americans who have tribal protections and a set of sovereignty that protects them, they also have experienced various kind of voting rights issues, because many voting rules are state by state. So there's sometimes a conflict between the rules of the state and the impact they have on Native Americans being able to vote and their own sovereignty. So as we all know, coming from different states, you see that diversity and that you don't have the kind of blanket protection that the John Lewis Voting Rights Act offers, because we're giving that to the states. So Native Americans are also coming forward to say we also need federal protections that help us overcome these barriers that we may be seeing in our particular states. So that is something that we also want to support. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is the Puerto Rican 51st effort. So similar to DC in a way, Puerto Rico does not have the full rights to vote. They have some access and some limited representation, but they don't have the full representation that we have as citizens in our state. And Puerto Rico being one of the islands that is so impacted by climate change and hurricanes and also a colonial history, that makes it something where they're saying, well, you know, we moved to one stage where we're a little closer to having full citizenship rights. We've left colonialism behind to some degree. And now we want to take the next step to have fuller representation, have fuller federal recognition, and fuller rights as citizens than they currently do now. So similar to the DC statehood effort, there's an organized statehood for Puerto Rico effort. And we want to make sure people are aware of that. They did have some conversations on Capitol Hill this year. So things are starting to move. And I think that's another, and this here is a website that you all can go to read more about that, pr51st.com. So that's something you can learn about. If there are populations in your state that want to learn more, this is a place that they could go and be a part of that effort. And we also have the US Virgin Islands. I had not found a coordinated, organized effort to this extent for the US Virgin Islands, but you know, we have American Samoa, who is at, they have representation at the Democratic Convention or at the Republican Convention this year, but do they have the same set of rights that we all have? So I wanted to at least be able to share these other two. The Puerto Rico one isn't part of the formal set of four that we're all focusing on, but I just wanted to make sure that everyone was aware that this effort is out there and to support it if they wish. Okay, so from there, why don't we next look at strategy? So what is it that we want to be able to do once we leave today behind? Today is a day of awareness, a day to talk about these bills, make sure people know what they are. So what are the next steps? What are some things that we could do? So from there, I want to go back to Charles, get some ideas from him about what individuals and organizations can do to move these bills forward. And then I also want to hear from Jonah as well. Charles?
Thank you, Catherine. And for the purpose of this discussion, I want to say I'm a guy who goes out and knocks on doors, okay? So that's where a lot of my stuff is coming from. One of the things that I've learned over the last few years in doing the knocking on doors part is that in a lot of our communities, we work in silos. And what I mean is nonprofit X does its thing, nonprofit B does theirs, nonprofit M does what they do. And the two don't work together.
Mhm.
So we either get oversaturation or no saturation. So one of the things that I have been preaching to everybody that will listen to my gravelly voice, build coalitions, build coalitions. Get with your fellow people in your communities. That's why I was meeting today with the new director for the Center for African American Studies. I want to bring him in as part of a community coalition to work on efforts in my community. And I have found, and when I say, build coalitions, who do you talk to? I'm a member of the League of Women Voters in my community. I'm a member of the Southern Coalition for Social Justice in my community. I'm a member of the NAACP in my community. Now, I'm retired and I have time to do all this stuff, right? And I know it's hard for everybody else to do it, but join some efforts and bring other people into your efforts, and go knock out on some doors. Get some business size cards that a member of my community did one time in the last election, I should say, got business cards made up that said vote and why it's important. And she went through the grocery store, the gas line, and she gave out her cards. And she was an older white lady, 80-something years old. And that was her individual contribution. And don't be afraid to talk about voting. I think in some of our communities, and I've said this to a regional convening of people, stop being so nice, okay? The people that are threatening and creating things that are against our advancement and against equity, equality, and inclusion, they are not nice. Now, I'm not saying we go out and be ugly people, but let's get rid of some of that, as I like to call it in my community, that Southern charm and that Southern niceness. Let's go into the fight. If they got a gun, we got a gun. If they got a knife, we got a knife. I hate to use those illustrations, but we can't go ill-equipped to the discussion and to the engagement. The other thing that I wanted to mention here is some nonprofits in several states, in Florida in particular, they're introducing what are known as states voting rights bills. Since we're having issues at the top in the Congress, they've developed a version of that for state legislatures. Now, in Florida, they know that they have an uphill fight. But guess what they plan to do? Introduce the bill with an ally, introduce it again, and hopefully over time they get that bill. And I will get the information to Catherine. The two groups that are pioneering this is the Southern Coalition for Social Justice and the Fair Representation and Redistricting groups, two separate groups, and they are pushing that concept. And that is something that we can do.
Thank you. That's great. Let me go to Jonah to see, because Jonah had suggested a couple of dates that are important in August and September that could be helpful in organizing. So let's talk about that as well.
Sure. Thanks, Catherine. And I did look up a little on the effects on people with disabilities of the Voting Rights, John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and saw some powerful statements from disability rights leaders in support of the act and showing how it would impact and affect people with disabilities. So I wanted to mention that.
Okay, that's in the chat, right?
Right. I put those in the chat.
Thanks.
It was something I kind of had a sense of, but I wanted to make sure before I just said it. So there are two dates coming up. National Voter Registration Day is September 17th. The League of Women Voters is a major partner in that, but all of us should be, that's a great moment, whether you're working in a partisan way or nonpartisan way, to go out there and get people to register to vote, to make sure people are updating their voter registration. Also coming up much faster in 2 weeks is Poll Worker Recruitment Day on August 1st. And that is really important. We're, hearing stories at the Syracuse rally today. We heard a story of someone who was a Black leader in our community, who's well known, who was really given a lot of trouble by someone who was really disrespectful to him at the polls just recently. around his address on his and if he wasn't someone who knew what he was doing and knew his rights, he probably would have walked away and not ended up voting. And we need good people who are poll monitors. We need our people there who are going to support people and make sure they know their rights and make sure they're able to vote. And not let them be the people not let the people who are trying to prevent us from voting be the people in the polling places. So it's really important that we get our people out there registered as poll workers. And it's a great way for young people to make some money. Poll workers are a paid position. So it's a great way for people across the board to make a little bit of money. And we should know that when we're recruiting people that it's a paid position and a nice way. And that's a nice bonus of doing it. But that is August 1st. And hope everyone can join and do that and sign up. And I put a link for Power the Polls that we collaborate with and they lead the effort. But I think everything we do right now, we have to do everything we can and put all of our effort to getting people to vote before, by election day. And we call it October voter. We think that it's really important that people who are living in places where they can vote early, so they're not prevented because of a thunderstorm or the car breaking down or family emergency from voting on election day. It's really important. Here in New York, we had this special election to fill the disgraced Santos's seat, and there was a huge snowstorm. And people who got their ballots in through absentee balloting won the election. Those are the people who were able to get their vote in. And we want to make sure everyone has a chance to vote. So encouraging people to vote early and helping them vote in the face of things like what Catherine was referring to, where they took away early voting in South Carolina, where we're still able to get people to the polls. And in spite of their attacks on us and all their efforts to place barriers, that we are getting out to vote.
Now, I want to ask about some of the resources that have been produced by the coalition that can be shared out. Now, there's a brochure that talks about all four of these bills. I have a few. So what is the opportunity to get these brochures out to the folks who are signed up on my list? Can I, if people want some of these brochures, are there any left? How does that work?
We can
I'm
try
not
to
sure
help.
how many there are, probably.
We can try to help. We mailed them all out.
Okay.
We can try to help, and especially if you wanted to have a pile to mail out, Catherine, or something to that effect, or others do, we can discuss that and try to help. And of course, people are feel free to print them, and I can work to find the link and put that in the chat. But
Okay, and I can mail that back out to everybody on the list. I'll make sure I see an email there popping up. I'll make sure that I get to each person who signed up for this event. The question, do you want actual physical brochures, hard copy brochures, or do you want a printable link that you can print up as many as you want, print on demand? And I'll discuss that with you once we, get the response from folks here. But they did produce some materials like these, this behind me, this poster, and some buttons and pins and some other things. So whatever is available that I can get to you all, I'll be sure to do that. So I also, Charles, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to jump in since we're talking about this. I want to mention something that we've done here in the upstate. And because what we're talking about, at the core of what we're talking about, is civic engagement. Okay. Over the years and decades, people have trickled out of civic engagement. So one of the things that we're talking about here in our community is attend your local board of elections meetings. Okay. Attend those, see what they're talking about. Here's where you're going to find out if you have volunteer shortages. You're going to find out what polls are being closed or moved or merged. And raise your hand and have a voice. Okay? Attend those meetings. A lot of people in a lot of communities don't go to that meeting, but that's where that local election policy making is being made. So attend those. I do as much as I can. I go. And I sit there to the point that they look up and they say, what does he want today? And my thing is, I want fairness, okay? And the other thing that we've done in our community, I think can be replicated across, is one of our nonprofit organizations put together like a civilian corps. And what do I mean by that? I mean that we have all these civic meetings from city council, county council, school boards, and all these things. What we've done is gotten people to volunteer to go to those meetings because I can't go to all of them. You can't go to all of them. So they've gotten people who volunteered and say, I will go to that meeting and I will do a report out that we then distribute to all of our member coalition members. And you get a sense of what's going on. And it goes down to that civic engagement piece, which is what voting is a core element of.
Well, that is great. And I want to thank Jonah. Jonah, I know you have to step out a little early. So thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your comments and your insight. And I will be back in touch with whatever requests we have from this group for materials and next steps. So thank you, Jonah.
Thank you so much for having me, Catherine. Sorry, I have to go pick up my daughter. I'm really grateful to be included and grateful for everyone here today. And I know, we are the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice, and we're going to keep fighting together and keep working together in a positive way, making good trouble, necessary trouble. So thank you so much for having me. I'm sorry to have to leave.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to ask Charles if you have any closing remarks, and then I have a few closing remarks, and then we'll go from there.
I was reading on social media the other day around the 4th of July, and what someone said was, celebrate this 4th of July because it may be the last time you have an opportunity to do it this way. And when I read it initially, I said, oh, that's an over-exaggeration. But then I sat back and I thought about Project 2025. I thought about the possibility of Trump getting back in office. Mm-hmm. And I thought about next 4th of July. And it concerns me that we may lose that. We may lose reasons that we celebrate freedom, equity, and inclusion and diversity may be lost by this time next year. Because keep in mind, the person, Trump, who says that if he gets in office, he'll be a dictator only on the first day. Well, that's really all he needs, okay? And then with the roadmap. So I want to encourage everybody on this call, if you're sitting on the sidelines, get up. Get up off the sidelines. Put your foot in the water, jump in the pool with your clothes on, however you want to say that. But there is a sense of urgency that I feel when I go out every day and I am talking to people in my community and on Zoom calls like this. I have a sense of urgency. I would like for everyone on this call to walk away with a sense of urgency, that what we're talking about is not hyperbole. We're not talking about impossibilities. We're talking about what really could happen, and they're telling us what could happen. Now, if you believe in that and support that, you're on the right track. I don't. I believe in protecting freedoms, rights, and equalities. And I think if this country is ever going to live up to be a more perfect union, then more people like you and I are going to have to get off the sidelines. We're going to have to get other people to get in the polls. And the last wall of defense that we have, people, is the vote. And if we lose that, we're done. As a democracy, as you and I have known it all of our lives. And I'm getting preachy right now, but I got you. And I want you to understand that this is important. Spread the word. Get out of your comfort zone. Knock on some doors, talk to some people that you don't normally talk to. Tell all the kids in your house that you control their vote and they must go vote this year if they are eligible. Tell your college students, get out of the parties, get into the local communities, get people registered and get them to the polls. This is potentially the last time we will have an ability to do this in a country that we recognize today.